Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. I never thought much about love. I mean, sure, I had crushes, but I never believed in that whole love at first sight thing. Emma. She's lived in the house right across the street from me for as long as I can remember, but I never really paid attention to her. Not like that, anyway. She had this quiet way about her, always walking with her head down, a book in her hand, just lost in her own world. I figured she was the shy, studious type. But something about the way she walked, the way her hair caught the sun, made me think she was different from everyone else. I first really noticed her one summer afternoon. I was out mowing the lawn when I saw her walking past, headphones in, humming along to whatever song she was listening to. For some reason, I couldn't take my eyes off her, and then, as if the universe had a twisted sense of humor, she tripped over a small rock on the sidewalk and almost fell flat on her face. I rushed over to help her, probably looking like a fool, but she just laughed. "I'm okay," she said, brushing herself off. "But I wouldn't mind if you helped me up anyway." That was the first time we really spoke. From there, things just started to fall into place. I found myself seeing her more often. We started talking more about books, music, and just random stuff. I realized she wasn't the shy girl I had pegged her as. She had this fire in her that I couldn't ignore. It's funny because I thought I knew what love was. I'd seen it in movies, heard about it from friends, and imagined it in my head. But with Emma, it was different. It wasn't like some grand romantic gesture or a fireworks moment. It was small, like the way she smiled when I surprised her with her favorite coffee one morning, or how she leaned in close when we'd share a joke. I guess love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and subtle. One evening, she asked if I wanted to take a walk with her down by the park. It was just a casual thing, but as we walked side by side, I couldn't help but feel something shift between us. It was the way our hands brushed together, the way we both laughed at the same silly thing. That night, as we stood at the park's edge, watching the sunset, I realized that I had already fallen for her, in a way I didn't even see coming. "I've always loved this spot," she said, her voice soft. "It feels like the world's quiet here, you know." I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything. But then she turned to me, her eyes bright in the fading light, and I knew she knew. But there was this moment where everything felt like it had led up to this one. Single heartbeat between us. Without thinking, I took her hand, and she didn't pull away. It wasn't dramatic or movie-worthy. It was just right. It felt like I had found something I hadn't even known I was looking for. From then on, we were inseparable. We'd spend late nights talking on her porch or wandering around the neighborhood, not really caring about where we were going. I realized as we got closer that love wasn't just about the big gestures or the perfect moments. It was about showing up, being there, and growing together in the quiet spaces. Emma taught me that love doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it's just a look, a smile, or the way someone's presence makes the world feel a little less chaotic. And for me, she was that presence. Maybe it wasn't love at first sight, but it was something better. It was slow, steady, and real, and that's the kind of love I'll always believe in. How's that? I don't know what happened next exactly. I never expected to fall in love at work, but that's exactly what happened with Emma. We were both pretty new at the company, and our desks happened to be next to each other. At first, I didn't think much of it. We exchanged polite hellos in the morning, small talk during breaks, that kind of thing. But there was something about the way she smiled, like it was just for me, even if it wasn't, and the way she listened, like she really cared about what I had to say. One day, we worked on a project together. It was a tight deadline, and we ended up staying late to finish everything. By the time we wrapped up, the office was nearly empty, and we just sat there for a moment, exhausted but kind of happy. I looked at her and realized how much I had been looking forward to that quiet moment. Just the two of us. We started talking more after that, outside of work hours, about our favorite books, movies, and random stuff. She laughed at my bad jokes, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations more than anything else. And it wasn't just the little things that made me like her more. It was the way she made me feel like I could be myself around her, like I could let my guard down. Eventually, I realized I was in love with her. I had been falling for her for weeks without even realizing it. Every time we talked, my heart raced a little faster, and I found myself finding excuses to be near her, but I was nervous. I didn't want to make things awkward at work. Then one evening, we were walking to our cars after another late shift, and she just asked me. She said, "Do you feel the same way about me?" My heart stopped. She had been feeling it too. I said yes. We laughed about how neither of us had the courage to admit it first. After that, everything changed. We started dating, and somehow it made everything feel right. I never thought I'd fall for someone at work, but Emma was different. She wasn't just my colleague anymore. She became my best friend, my confidant, the person I wanted to share everything with. In the end, it wasn't about the workplace or the hours we spent there. It was about the connection we had and how we both ended up in the same place at the same time, without even realizing that fate had a hand in it. Would you like me to continue the story or dive into any specific part? I remember the first time I saw her. It was like the world paused for just a moment, her nose buried in a book, completely unaware of everything around her. It was a simple moment, but it felt like the start of something important, to me anyway. I started going to that coffee shop more often, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. I'd sit at the same table by the window, pretending to focus on my own work, but all I could do was watch her. The way she laughed when the barista made a joke, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when it fell in front of her face, the way she always had this quiet confidence. There was something about her that captivated me. One day, I gathered enough courage to speak to her. I told myself it was just a casual conversation, that I wasn't going to let my heart race. But when I walked over, my voice betrayed me, shaky and unsure. She looked up from her book, smiling politely, and I could have sworn my heart stopped. We talked for a few minutes about nothing important. Just the weather, the book she was reading, the usual small talk. But to me, it was everything. After that, I'd find reasons to be in the same place at the same time. Sometimes I'd see her across the room, laughing with her friends, and I'd feel this longing in my chest. She was always surrounded by people, always busy with her life. And I was always on the outside watching, hoping she'd notice me the way I noticed her. I never told her how I felt. I told myself it was better that way. She didn't need the weight of my feelings. And besides, what if I ruined everything by saying something? I wasn't even sure if she thought of me the way I thought of her. There was a night when I stayed late at the coffee shop, long after the others had left. I was just finishing my work when she came in, all alone. It was strange to see her without her usual group of friends. She walked right past me, and I felt this rush of panic, like, now or never, you know. I called out her name a little too loudly, but she turned with that same soft smile. "Hey," she said, and I swear the whole room faded out. I wanted to say something meaningful, something that would make her understand, but all I could manage was, "How's your book?" She laughed, and we talked for a little while, but I could tell she was tired. And when she stood up to leave, I felt like I was back to square one, just another stranger she'd talked to briefly. I watched her walk out, and in that moment I knew nothing would change. I would always be the one who admired from afar, the one with feelings she'd never know about. Sometimes I think about what might have been if I'd been braver, if I'd told her what was in my heart. But I know it's too late for that. She's moving on with her life, and I'm still here, holding on to a quiet love that she'll never feel in return. Maybe that's okay, though. Maybe it's enough to just love her from a distance, even if she'll never know. I never thought I'd find someone like her in a place like the gym. But there she was, standing at the free weight section, adjusting her ponytail as if the whole world wasn't watching. I'd been going there for months, maybe even years, sticking to my routine, never really paying attention to anyone else. The gym was just a place for me to sweat it out and clear my head. But that day, something changed. It was the way she moved. Graceful but strong. She wasn't just lifting weights, she was dominating them. I watched her for a few moments, trying not to stare. She caught my eye once, and I quickly looked away, feeling like I had just been caught in a bad movie scene. The next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about her. It was like she was everywhere. I'd catch glimpses of her out of the corner of my eye. Pushing through sets, her face determined and focused, but there was something soft in her smile when she wasn't lifting, a quiet confidence. I wanted to talk to her, but every time I tried to come up with an excuse, I felt stupid. "Oh, hey, do you come here often?" Seriously? I was better than that. Then one day, as I was finishing my set on the bench press, I heard her voice. "You need a spotter?" I turned my head, and there she was, standing at the end of my bench with a towel over her shoulder, looking effortlessly cool. I was so surprised I almost forgot how to speak. Yeah, that would be great," I stammered. She smiled like she had all the time in the world and stepped closer. "You're not going to get anything done if you don't push yourself." Her words were like a spark, like someone had turned on a light in my head. She didn't just say things. She said things that made sense. That made you want to be better. As she helped me lift, our conversation started to flow. Casual at first, about sets, reps, how we hated leg day, but then it went beyond that. We talked about life, about why we came to the gym in the first place. She told me she started working out as a way to cope with stress, and I found myself sharing things I hadn't told anyone else, about how I used to feel invisible, how I wanted to be more than just a guy who went through the motions. And just like that, I realized she wasn't just someone I'd met at the gym. She was someone I could actually talk to. We laughed more than I expected, and by the time I was done with my workout, I didn't want to leave. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, wiping her forehead. I smiled, feeling like I had just won something. "You bet." From then on, we'd see each other almost every day. Sometimes we trained together. Sometimes we just spotted each other. And every time it felt like we were getting closer. The gym became more than just a place to sweat and burn calories. It became the place I looked forward to because it meant I'd see her. It wasn't long before we started texting outside the gym, about workouts, but also about everything else. She had this way of making the smallest things feel important, like she was always present in the moment, listening. Eventually, I couldn't hide it anymore. One afternoon, after a long set of squats, and after a few awkward silences between sets, I finally said it. "Look, I don't know how to say this, but I like you a lot." She paused, looking me straight in the eyes. There was this flicker of surprise, then a soft smile. "I like you too," she said, and my heart did a flip. From that day on, we didn't just meet at the gym. We met for coffee, for walks in the park, for dinner. The connection grew deeper with each day. She made me want to be better, not just at the gym, but in life. I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to keep showing up. And all of it started because of a chance encounter while lifting weights. Funny how life works that way. Sometimes the things you think are just part of your routine turn out to be the moments that change everything. From the moment I met her, I knew something was different. It was one of those moments where everything around me seemed to blur. And there she was, standing just a few feet away, as if the universe had paused for me to notice. She had this way of making the simplest things seem special. Her laugh, the way she spoke, the way she looked at the world. It was magnetic. I had always been a bit hesitant with love. I was used to the idea that it wasn't something that just happened, that it took work, time, and understanding. But with her, it felt effortless. We started out as friends, just talking about everything and nothing at all. But soon those conversations turned into late-night talks, shared secrets, and quiet moments where just being in the same space felt like home. There was one night, though, when I realized I had fallen for her, probably without even noticing. We were sitting on the roof of my apartment building, watching the stars, and I turned to her, suddenly overwhelmed by the way she made me feel. It was as if my whole life had been leading to this exact moment, and I didn't want it to end. I knew then, in the depths of my heart, that I didn't want to live another day without her by my side. But as any person in love does, I hesitated. I was afraid to put myself out there, afraid of ruining what we had. But one day, after weeks of wondering, I took the plunge. I told her how I felt, unsure if she would feel the same. My heart pounded as I waited for her response. She didn't say much at first, but I could see it in her eyes. The same look I had when I realized I loved her too. And just like that, everything changed. We started a new chapter of our lives together. Every day felt like an adventure, and it didn't take long for me to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that this was the person I was meant to spend the rest of my life with. The proposal was simple but perfect. I asked her to marry me on that same rooftop under the stars where it all began. I remember the moment so clearly. Her eyes were wide with surprise, and I held my breath as she looked at me. And then her smile, that smile that told me everything I needed to know. She said yes, and in that instant I knew my life would always be better with her. Our wedding day came, and I could hardly believe it. There we were, standing before our closest friends and family, exchanging vows, promising to be there for each other forever. I had waited a long time for love like this, and now here it was, real and beautiful. And as I stand here reflecting on how it all started, I realize that sometimes love isn't something you plan or search for. Sometimes it just happens, and when it does, it's worth every step you take to make it last. So here we are together forever. At university, and eventually married her. I still remember the first time I saw her. It was on the first day of university. I had just moved into the dorms, and the campus was buzzing with new faces and fresh energy. I was a little lost, trying to find my way around, when I spotted her. She was sitting on a bench, reading a book. Her hair was long and wild, like it hadn't been brushed in hours, but somehow it made her look even more beautiful. She had this quiet aura around her that made everything around her feel a little slower, more peaceful. I couldn't quite explain it, but there was something about her that caught my attention in a way no one else did. I didn't have the courage to talk to her that day, but every time I saw her after that, I felt this pull. It wasn't just her looks, it was the way she carried herself, how she seemed to be in her own world, content and self-assured. I guess that's when I started noticing how much I wanted to know her, to figure out what made her tick. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I finally got the chance to talk to her. We were both in the same class, and I noticed she was struggling with the material, which was kind of a relief because I was too. I decided to offer help, just a casual, "Hey, do you want to study together sometime?" She agreed, and from that moment on, something shifted. We started meeting up regularly, studying late into the nights, talking about everything from books to movies to our childhoods. And the more I got to know her, the more I realized just how amazing she was, intelligent, funny, a little quirky, and incredibly kind. She had this way of making everyone feel seen, like she genuinely cared about who they were. I started looking forward to those study sessions more than I'd ever looked forward to anything else. We'd laugh about the weirdest things, challenge each other's thoughts, and sometimes just sit in comfortable silence. One evening, after a particularly long study session, I walked her back to her dorm. We were standing outside for a while, and there was this moment where neither of us said anything, but it felt like we were both thinking the same thing. It was in that silence that I realized I was falling for her. And not in some light-hearted way. I was deeply in love with her, in a way that felt natural, inevitable even. But of course I didn't tell her, not yet. I was scared. Scared that it would ruin our friendship. Scared of what it would mean if things didn't work out. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. Couldn't stop wondering what would happen if I just took the risk. Eventually I did. One evening, after one of our study sessions, I just blurted it out. "I think I'm in love with you," I said. And my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. She just looked at me for a moment, her eyes soft. Then, without saying a word, she reached out, took my hand and smiled. It was the simplest gesture, but it meant everything. She didn't need to say anything else. Her smile told me everything I needed to know. From that point on, everything changed. We started dating, but it wasn't just the typical college romance. It was real, deep, and rooted in the connection we'd already built as friends. We spent more time together, and the more I was with her, the more I knew that this wasn't just a fleeting feeling. She was the one. We didn't just share interests, we shared values, goals, dreams. We supported each other through the ups and downs of university life, growing together in ways I hadn't even thought possible. Graduation came and went, and the world outside the university seemed bigger and more daunting. But with her by my side, it felt like we could take anything on. We moved in together, started building a life together. And then, one quiet evening, as we were cooking dinner in our tiny apartment, I asked her the question I'd been thinking about for a while. I got down on one knee, holding the ring I'd secretly bought months before, and I asked her to marry me. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out from the anticipation. But then she said yes, and I knew right then in that little kitchen with the smell of garlic in the air and the sound of the rain tapping against the windows, that this was the beginning of the rest of our lives. We got married a year later, surrounded by friends, family, and the life we'd built together. And every day since, I've been more grateful than I could have ever imagined for that chance encounter, for the courage to reach out and talk to her that day in the library, for the quiet moments that led us here. It all started when I first met Emily. I was 18, and she was just a year younger, but the connection we had felt like we'd known each other for lifetimes. It was at a mutual friend's birthday party, and I remember the moment I saw her, sitting there, laughing with her friends, her eyes sparkling under the dim party lights. There was something about her that drew me in, an energy that felt familiar, almost magnetic. At first, we were just friends. We would talk for hours about everything and nothing. She had this warmth about her, a kindness that was rare. She listened in a way that made me feel seen, heard, understood. We shared stories about our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. Over time, that friendship deepened into something more, and soon I realized I was falling for her. But it wasn't just infatuation. It was genuine. I loved the way her laugh made my heart race, the way she made the ordinary feel extraordinary. We started dating and everything felt perfect. Every moment with her was magical. I couldn't imagine my life without her. We talked about the future, about getting a house, traveling the world, growing old together. It felt like we were unstoppable, like nothing could ever tear us apart. But as time went on, something began to shift. At first, it was subtle. I noticed her texting a lot more, her phone screen lighting up constantly when we were together. She'd laugh at texts and give me distracted smiles, but it didn't feel right. I didn't want to admit it at first. I trusted her, I loved her. But there was a part of me that started to feel uneasy, like something wasn't quite adding up. I remember one night she was supposed to meet me at our usual spot by the lake. We had this tradition, sitting by the water, talking about everything and nothing, but she didn't show up. I texted her, called her, but there was no answer. I waited for over an hour, my heart growing heavier with every passing minute. When she finally called me back, she was out of breath, apologizing and telling me she'd lost track of time. She said she was with a friend, and that was that. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The cracks in our relationship grew slowly at first. She started pulling away more, keeping secrets, lying about where she'd been or who she was with. I confronted her once, but she just dismissed my concerns, told me I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. Then one night it all came crashing down. I found out she had been seeing someone else, a guy from her class, someone I knew by name but never really paid much attention to. She'd been hiding it for months, lying to me about where she was, who she was with. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt sick, numb, betrayed in a way I hadn't thought was possible. She apologized, of course. She said it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. I couldn't look at her the same way again. I couldn't erase the image of her with someone else, the lies, the deception. I had trusted her with everything, my heart, my future, and she had shattered it all. I remember walking away from her that night, my chest tight with grief. I thought I was going to break. The girl I had loved, the one I had built my dreams around, had chosen someone else. And in that moment I realized something painful. Love wasn't always enough. Trust, honesty, and respect were the real foundations of any relationship, and she had broken all of those. It took time, a lot of time for me to heal. I tried to move on, but I still thought about her, about us every day. Sometimes I still wonder what went wrong, if I had missed something, if I could have saved us. But deep down I know it wasn't my fault. I had loved her with everything I had, and in the end, that wasn't enough to keep her from betraying me. Now when I look back on our time together, I can still remember the way she made me feel, alive, hopeful, like the world was full of possibilities. But I also know that betrayal isn't just the end of a relationship, it's the end of a dream. And that's the hardest part. You never just lose the person, you lose the future you thought you... It all started when she walked into the office for the first time. Her name was Emily. I noticed her immediately, though she was just another new hire. She had this quiet confidence about her, and her smile, it was the kind of smile that made everything seem a little brighter. At first it was just casual, Small talk here and there, nothing special. But over time, those moments grew longer. Our conversations became more personal. I found myself waiting for the day to start, just so I could talk to her. We worked in the same department, and it wasn't long before we were collaborating on projects. I never expected it to turn into anything more than that. She was professional, sharp, and always on top of things. But there was something about her warmth, the way she would laugh at my bad jokes, or how she seemed to really listen when I talked about my life. That made my heart do a little flutter. She wasn't like anyone I had met before. One late evening, we were the last ones in the office working on a tight deadline. I remember feeling the tension in the air as we shared, a quiet moment over our laptops, her hand brushing mine accidentally. I felt my pulse quicken. She looked at me, her eyes soft, a little hesitant. "Sorry," she murmured. But I saw something in her eyes that made me wonder if it was truly an accident. A few weeks after that, we had our first real conversation outside of work. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee, just to unwind after a stressful week. I said yes, not really knowing what I was getting into, but feeling excited anyway. The conversation flowed easily. We talked about everything, our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. It was on that night that I realized I was falling for her. I think she felt it too. Slowly but surely, she became more than just a colleague. We started spending more time together, dinners, walks in the park, even weekend trips. She was always there when I needed her, and I tried to be there for her too. She shared stories about her past, her relationships, and how she was always a little afraid of letting someone get too close. I understood. I'd been hurt before as well, and I think that's what made us connect in a way that felt deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. But eventually things started to change. The little signs were subtle at first. She'd be a little more distant after our weekends together. She'd take longer to reply to my messages. I tried not to think too much of it. I was busy, she was busy. Work was stressful for both of us. But the longer it went on, the more I began to feel like something was off. Then came the day when I found out the truth. I had been working late one night trying to finish a project when I decided to swing by her desk to check on something. She wasn't there, but I saw her phone sitting on her desk, and for some reason I glanced at it. There in plain sight was a text. Not from me. It was from someone else, someone I didn't recognize. I tried to shake it off, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I waited until she came back, pretending everything was fine. But that night, the truth came spilling out. She confessed. Well, it wasn't even so much a confession as it was her admitting that she'd been seeing someone else. Not just anyone, but a man from another department. Someone who I had trusted as a friend. Someone I had introduced her to. It felt like the ground beneath me had just cracked open. I was stunned, unable to process it. How could she? How could she do this to me after everything we'd shared? All the late-night talks, the dinners, the quiet mornings together. The way she had looked at me when she thought no one was watching. It felt like all of it had been a lie. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that all along I had been the one who believed in something real, while she had already moved on to someone else. The trust, the love, everything had been shattered in an instant. I had built up this world in my mind where we were happy together, and in a heartbeat it all came crashing down. I wanted to scream, to yell, to demand answers. But instead I sat there, staring at her, waiting for the words that would make sense of it all. She didn't offer much of an explanation. Just that she had gotten confused and that she didn't want to hurt me. But the damage was already done. The hardest part was walking away, because as much as I wanted to hate her for what she had done, a part of me still cared for her. It still felt like there was some version of Emily that I had loved. And that's what hurt the most, realizing that the person I loved had never truly existed. Or maybe she had, but she had chosen someone else in the end. It's been months since then. I've tried to move on, tried to rebuild my life, but every now and then I'll hear her name or see a picture of her, and it all comes flooding back. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why she did it. Maybe she never meant to hurt me. Maybe she just didn't know how to deal with the weight of our relationship. Or maybe she was just looking for something else, something more. But the truth is, I'll never know for sure. It started when I least expected it. I was just another guy, caught in the rhythms of my own life, going to school, working part-time, trying to figure things out. Then one day I saw her. It wasn't like one of those dramatic movie moments where everything freezes. But something about her presence felt different. She wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. Her name was Emily. She had this warmth about her, something genuine that drew you in without her even trying. We met in a cafe one rainy afternoon. I was reading, minding my own business, when she sat across from me, completely unaware of the space she was about to occupy in my world. She had a kind of energy that made you feel at home even in the busiest of places. I think she noticed I was alone and, being the kind of person she was, she smiled at me. I returned the smile, and before I knew it, we were talking. She was easy to talk to. I told her about my love for books, my obsession with old films, my constant confusion about what I was doing with my life. She listened to all of it, and in a way that made me feel understood, even though I barely knew her. I found myself sharing more than I had intended, but somehow it felt right. We kept meeting at that same cafe over the next few weeks. Slowly it became a tradition, our tradition. On weekends, we'd spend hours there getting lost in conversation. I could talk to her about anything. She had this uncanny way of seeing things from a perspective I never thought of. She challenged me, not in a harsh way, but gently, like she was helping me grow without me even realizing it. I remember the first time we had a real disagreement. It was about something trivial at first, but it ended up revealing so much about us. We had different views on the world, but instead of pulling away from each other, we listened, tried to understand where the other person was coming from. That was when I realized how much I respected her. It wasn't just her beauty, though, don't get me wrong. She was stunning in her own quiet way, but her mind, her heart, her kindness. It was everything about her. Time passed, and the more I got to know Emily, the more I knew she was the one. There were moments when I wasn't sure if she felt the same way. I was just a guy fumbling through life, and she seemed like she had it all together. But one evening, as we sat watching the sunset, she turned to me, her eyes full of something soft but steady. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said, and my heart did a flip. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them. Like she wasn't afraid. Like she trusted me with this piece of her heart. That moment changed everything. But even after that confession, there was still the hesitation. We weren't rushing into anything. We took our time, letting the relationship grow naturally. We traveled together, made memories, laughed, and sometimes argued. We experienced the highs and lows, but always with each other, always supporting one another. Then came the day when I knew it was time. I had thought about it for a long time, how I would do it, what I would say. I wanted it to be perfect, though I realized that perfect wasn't about grand gestures or fancy settings. It was about us, about what we had built together. I took her to the cafe where it all started. The rain was falling softly outside, just like that first day we met. I got down on one knee and, with her surprised and happy face before me, asked her to marry me. Her eyes welled up with tears, and before I even finished asking, she said yes. We got married the following year, in a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Our vows were simple, just two people who had found each other in the chaos of life and had decided to never let go. I promised to always listen to her, to stand by her side, to laugh with her, and to grow old with her. And now every time I look at her, I feel like the luckiest man alive. She's still the same Emily, the one who made me feel seen and loved when I needed it most. Our love story isn't perfect, but it's ours. And every day with her is a reminder that love is about finding the one person who makes all the mess of life worthwhile. It all started when I met Emily at a mutual friend's party. I was barely 22, still figuring out life. But the moment I saw her, I knew there was something different about her. She had this quiet grace, a smile that lit up everything around her. It wasn't love at first sight. I didn't believe in that stuff. But it was something deeper, a pull that I couldn't ignore. We started talking and it was easy, natural. We were both passionate about art, and that became the thing that drew us together. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself looking forward to every moment we spent together. Eventually, I asked her to be my girlfriend, and to my surprise, she said yes. We spent so much time together, talking about everything, laughing about silly things, comforting each other in ways that only made sense to us. Our relationship grew deeper, and after a couple of years, I asked her to marry me. I was certain I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. She said yes, and it felt like everything was falling into place. Our wedding was everything we dreamed of. Beautiful, intimate with the people we loved the most. But after the wedding, things started to shift. At first, it was subtle. Little things that didn't seem like a big deal. Late nights at work, her spending more time with her friends, a certain distance when we'd talk. I tried to ignore it. I thought it was just a phase. But then came the moment I never saw coming. One evening, I came home early, hoping to surprise her, only to find her with someone else. In our house, in our bed. I was frozen, my heart shattered in an instant. She didn't even try to hide it. There was no guilt, no shame in her eyes. Just indifference. I asked her what happened, and she just shrugged, as if she couldn't care less about the destruction in front of her. She explained that she had fallen out of love with me, that maybe she never really felt the way I did, and all this time she had been pretending, waiting for the right moment to break free. It was the cruelest thing I'd ever heard. I left that night not knowing where I was going or what to do next. Our love story had turned into a nightmare. I still can't understand how everything we built could be so easily shattered. I thought we had something special, but in the end, I guess it wasn't enough. I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone again, but I know one thing for sure. I've learned that even the deepest love can be betrayed, and not everyone who says they love you actually means it. I remember the first time I saw her. Her name was Lily. Her smile lit up the room, and I felt like everything around me faded into the background. I'd always thought I was someone who didn't believe in love at first sight. But she changed that the moment she looked at me. She had this aura of kindness and grace that drew people in, and somehow she saw me, just a guy with a simple life, nothing extraordinary about me. But Lily made me feel extraordinary. We spent months getting to know each other, and in that time, I learned things I never thought I could learn about myself. She was smart, funny, full of dreams, everything I'd ever wanted. We spent late nights talking about the future, about our hopes and fears. I felt like I could trust her with my heart in a way I never had with anyone else. Every touch, every word she spoke, it all felt so perfect. She was my world. There was this one night under the stars when she told me she loved me. Her voice was so soft, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in it. I said it back without hesitation. I had never felt so sure of anything. It was as if we had built something so deep and beautiful together that nothing could ever tear it apart. But time, as it does, has a way of testing us. The months passed and the cracks began to show. Little things at first. She'd be distant sometimes, lost in thought, or she'd be out with her friends more often than before. I told myself it was just her being busy adjusting to life. But deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then came that day, the day I found out the truth. I had decided to surprise her, to show up at her apartment with dinner. When I walked in, I didn't expect to see what I saw. There she was in the arms of another man. Her face was flushed, her hair messy in that way that only happens when you're close to someone. He was holding her, and she didn't even see me at first. I stood there frozen, my heart breaking in a way I didn't know was possible. When she saw me, her face went pale. The man, his name was Eric, I later found out, stood up, looking guilty, but it didn't matter. The betrayal was already done. She tried to explain, to tell me it wasn't what it looked like, but I couldn't hear her. I couldn't hear anything except the sound of my own heart shattering. I left without a word, without giving her the chance to finish whatever it was she was going to say. What was there left to say, really? The girl I had loved with all my heart, who I thought was the one, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And for what? For someone else. I still don't know what was going through her mind. In the days that followed, I felt numb. I didn't want to see anyone, talk to anyone. I wanted to disappear to escape the pain. But the hardest part was seeing how she tried to reach out to me, trying to apologize, to make it right. I couldn't bring myself to listen. Not after everything. The worst part? I think I would have forgiven her if she had been truly sorry, if she had been honest from the beginning. But she wasn't, and that was the hardest truth to swallow. I look back now and wonder if I ever really knew her at all, or if she was just someone I imagined her to be. In the end, I think it was more about me than about her. I gave her all of me, but she couldn't do the same. She was the love of my life, but I wasn't hers. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see her smile. I still remember how it felt to be in her arms. But I also remember the betrayal. And I know that no matter how much I loved her, I can't go back to that. It was the kind of love that can't survive the truth, no matter how much you wish it could. I remember the first time I saw her like it was yesterday, even though it was years ago now. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the sun lazily drapes over everything, and time feels like it's slowing down just for you. I was sitting on the steps outside the old coffee shop I frequented, lost in a book when I heard the soft click of a door opening behind me. I didn't look up right away, figuring it was just another passerby, but then something made me glance up, and there she was. She wasn't anything like the girls I'd seen before. There was something so genuine about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She wasn't trying to stand out. She just did. Her hair was a little messy, like she didn't care too much about perfection, and her eyes, they had this warmth that felt like a home I hadn't realized I was missing. I don't know why, but the moment our eyes met, I knew I had to know her. Her name was Lily, and we started talking that day. Just small talk at first. She was friendly, easy to talk to, and had this laugh that made everything feel a little lighter. I didn't know it then, but that laugh would become my favorite sound in the world. We exchanged numbers before we parted ways, both of us trying to act casual, like we hadn't just met someone who made the world feel different. At first it was just texts here and there, casual conversations, but I found myself waiting for her messages, holding on to every word she'd send. She was smart, funny, and she had this way of looking at life that was so refreshing. Everything seemed clear when I talked to her, like I could finally breathe easy. One evening we met up at the park. It was one of those golden hours, where the sun was setting and everything around us looked like it was dipped in a soft orange glow. I remember sitting beside her, both of us just enjoying the silence for a moment, not needing to say much, but everything felt perfect. I couldn't help but wonder if she felt it too. The pull, that connection that seemed to exist beyond the words we spoke. We started seeing each other more. Sometimes it was coffee at that little shop, other times just long walks in the park or movies at her place. The more I got to know her, the more I realized how much I admired her, not just for her kindness or the way she could always make me laugh, but for the way she saw the world. She had this quiet strength, this gentle yet unshakable confidence. I'd never met anyone like her, and I never wanted to meet anyone else. One night, after a few months of just being together, she took my hand and said something that changed everything. "You know," she said, "sometimes I think we're just two people who stumbled into each other, who lives at exactly the right time." And that's when it hit me. It wasn't just chance or coincidence. I wanted to be with her, more than I'd ever wanted anything in my life. It wasn't just the fun we had together, or the way she made me feel like I was worth something. It was how everything felt more alive when she was near, the way my heart raced just thinking about her, how I could imagine building a future together, how with her it felt like time stood still but also moved forward all at once. I remember the first time I kissed her. It wasn't some grand moment in a movie, but it didn't need to be. We were sitting on a park bench, the sun setting behind us, just talking about our favorite books. And then, without thinking, I leaned in. She didn't pull away, didn't hesitate. Our lips met softly, and it felt like every moment before that kiss had been leading up to it. I don't think I've ever been so sure of anything in my life. When we pulled back, she smiled that beautiful smile, and in her eyes I saw the same thing I felt. It was like we were the only two people who existed in that moment. But it wasn't always easy. No love story ever is, right? There were moments when we'd fight, about silly things, sometimes about nothing at all. And there were days when we'd get frustrated with each other. But every time we'd find our way back. What we had was never perfect, but it was real and it was worth fighting for. Because in the end, I couldn't imagine my life without her. I didn't want to. And now, years later, as I look back at how we started, I know I was never the same after I met her. She taught me that love isn't just about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about those quiet days when nothing needs to be said and you're just happy to be with the person who makes you feel like you're exactly where you're meant to be. And if someone had told me that a random afternoon, sitting on those steps would lead me to the love of my life, I wouldn't have believed it. But life has a funny way of surprising you. All I know now is it's a love story I wouldn't trade for anything. It's been years since I last saw her, but there's something about the way time passes that never really dulls the sharpness of certain memories. I remember when we were just kids dreaming about the future, all innocence and possibility. Then life happened, as it tends to do, and we lost touch. I moved away and well, I guess she did too in her own way. But we both kept going, each with a story that we couldn't share. Not with each other, at least. I didn't know she'd be there. I wasn't expecting it, honestly. It was just another routine day, another commute, another train station, but there she was. The moment I saw her, my heart did that thing where it skips a beat, then picks up the pace like a kid discovering his first crush all over again. She was standing there, just as I remembered, though, of course. She was different, older, wiser. There was something in her eyes that I couldn't quite place, something that felt familiar and yet completely new. At first I thought I imagined it. It's crazy, right? Seeing someone you once loved in a place like that, out of nowhere, after all these years. I almost turned away. But she saw me, and I swear I saw a flicker of recognition in her face. Just a flicker, but enough to make me stop in my tracks. I approached her slowly, trying to read her, trying to figure out if she remembered who I was as clearly as I remembered her. When I was close enough, she smiled, a soft, hesitant smile, but it was all the invitation I needed. "Hey," I said, and my voice cracked slightly. I had so much I wanted to say, but the words were stuck. We stood there for a long moment, both of us trying to bridge the years of silence. The distance we'd put between us for reasons we'd never quite understood. "You..." She paused, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. That same uncertainty mixed with something else. "You're really here?" I nodded. "Yeah, it's been a long time. I thought about you. All the time," she confessed. And the way she said it felt like she was finally releasing something that had been trapped for years. I wanted to say something profound, something about how I'd missed her too, how the years apart had been unbearable, but instead I asked, "Do you remember the day we said goodbye? At this very station?" She laughed softly, almost like she couldn't believe we were talking about it after all this time. "Of course I do. You were wearing that old jacket of yours, the one you never liked but I always teased you about. And you said we'd find each other again somehow." I laughed, a little embarrassed. I remembered that jacket, and I remembered those words too. We were so sure of everything back then, young, foolish, but full of hope. "So here we are," I said, my heart racing again. "What now?" Her eyes softened, and for the first time in years, I could feel the walls between us start to crumble. "What now?" she repeated quietly, then offered a tentative smile. "Well, I guess we see where this goes, don't we?" And that was all it took. We both knew there were 1,000 reasons we could walk away, but there was only one reason. We'd stay. The kind of connection that doesn't fade with time, no matter how long you've been apart. It's a little hard to explain how it all happened because, well, it wasn't like some big, dramatic moment that hit me all at once. It was more like a slow realization, a quiet understanding that came over me one evening on her 20th birthday. Actually, we'd been friends for years. Since middle school, if I'm being honest. It was always her and me, always laughing at the same jokes, swapping thoughts about everything from books to what was wrong with the world. There was never any awkwardness between us. She'd always been the one person I could be completely myself with. But back then I never thought of her like that. She was just her, my best friend. Then that night, everything changed. Her birthday party was at a small cafe we used to go to all the time, and I remember watching her talk to everyone, smiling, laughing like she always did. But there was something different this time. Maybe it was the way she looked under the soft lighting, or the way she smiled a little more brightly as she opened her gifts. But I found myself just staring at her, and I couldn't stop. It was like I was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. Her laugh, I'd always loved it, but that night it felt like music. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved. It all hit me like a wave I couldn't avoid. I was suddenly aware of how close we were sitting, how her shoulder brushed against mine, and I wanted to be closer. I remember I couldn't quite keep the conversation going as easily as I usually could. My mind was somewhere else, caught up in this feeling I couldn't put a name to yet. But then she looked at me, and for a split second, there was this quiet understanding between us, like she could feel it too. But we didn't say anything. I could see the hint of something soft in her eyes. At the end of the night, when everyone was leaving, I walked her home like I always did. We were quiet for a while, just walking side by side under the streetlights. And then, just before we reached her door, she looked at me and said, "I'm glad you're still around." And in that moment, it hit me. I've been around all these years, right here, by her side, and I didn't even realize that I was falling for her until now. I didn't know how to say it. How to tell her that all this time I'd been in love with her. even though I hadn't recognized it until that very moment. But it wasn't the right time, and she didn't need me to say it then. I just smiled, said I was glad too, and we hugged just like we always had. But from that day on, everything changed. I knew she was the one, even if she didn't yet know that I was starting to see her differently. And every time we saw each other after that night, I felt like I was holding on to this secret, this beautiful thing that was growing between us. Even if neither of us was ready to speak it aloud just yet, it wasn't a sudden declaration. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was just this deep, quiet certainty that this was where I was meant to be, right here with her. And when the moment finally came, when I told her I loved her, I realized I had loved her all along. I never thought I'd find myself doing volunteer work. I'm a dragon, after all. We're meant to soar above, to command the skies, not to be stuck on the ground helping people. But my elders insisted. You need to understand the plight of those who live beneath you, they told me. So I begrudgingly agreed. That's when I met her. Her name's Lyra, and at first, I thought she was just another dragon like me, full of pride and strength here because she had to be. But as we worked side by side, I began to see her differently. She wasn't just strong, she was kind, compassionate, and so deeply moved by the suffering of the poor that it almost made her glow with warmth. We were assigned to help build homes for families in a remote village that had been ravaged by storms. As the days passed, I found myself drawn to her in ways I hadn't expected. The way she'd speak to the children with a soft, soothing voice, or the way she handled the heavy stones with such ease and grace, never once showing the strain even as others struggled. She'd smile at me when I looked over. That smile as bright as the sun, and I swear, for the first time in my life, I felt something deep stir inside me. It was strange, like a fire, but gentle. Not the usual blaze of competition or dominance I was used to. It was something else entirely. One evening, as we sat around the fire after a long day's work, she told me her story, how she had grown up in a similar village, where hardship was a part of life, and how she'd promised herself that she'd make the world better for others. I had always lived in the skies above the world, looking down detached, but listening to her I felt a tug in my heart. I realized that maybe I had been wrong all along. Lyra's passion, her dedication to helping others, it wasn't just inspiring, it was beautiful. And the more I saw it, the more I couldn't stop thinking about her. It wasn't just admiration, it was something deeper. One evening, when the sun was setting and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, I finally gathered the courage to tell her how I felt. I wasn't sure how a dragon like me could possibly deserve someone like her, but I had to speak. Lyra, I began, my voice slightly shaky. I've never felt this way before, not about anyone. You make me want to be more, to be better. I never knew how much I needed to change until I met you. She looked at me, her eyes soft, and I saw something flicker there, a recognition. She reached out, gently brushing my claw with her own. I feel the same, she said quietly. I didn't expect to find someone like you here either. But maybe we were meant to meet, to help others together. And from that moment, everything changed. We didn't just build homes for the poor. We built something even more precious, a bond between us. One that grew stronger with every day we spent together. The sky didn't seem so lonely anymore when we shared it. Side by side, wings beating in unison. We kept volunteering, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. For the people, yes, but also for us. It was the beginning of something truly magical. It started as just another normal day at the office, you know? I'm just doing my usual rounds, answering emails, organizing files, and making sure everything's running smoothly. But then every afternoon she would walk past my desk. At first it was nothing special. She was a university student, clearly busy with her own life, and I was just some guy working at a boring desk job. But something about her caught my attention. She was always carrying a stack of books, looking like she was on her way to the library or studying for a class. There was this focused energy about her that I couldn't quite ignore. She would pass by, always in a rush, maybe giving a brief nod if I happened to glance up, but that was it. For weeks, that was the routine. I'd catch myself looking forward to the brief moments when she'd walk by. One day, I was at the coffee machine and she happened to be there too. She didn't seem to recognize me at first, but I gave it a shot and smiled. Hey, I see you around here a lot. Are you studying at the university nearby? Her eyes lit up, and for a second I felt like I'd done something right. She laughed, a little embarrassed. and said, "Yeah, I'm studying engineering. I come here for some quiet time between classes." We started talking, just small talk at first, about her studies and my work. I think she found it interesting that someone like me was working in an office when she was knee-deep in equations and formulas. Slowly, we started bumping into each other more often. Sometimes, I'd catch her studying in the office lobby. Sometimes we'd end up at the coffee machine together. It felt natural, like our worlds were slowly crossing in ways neither of us expected. I won't lie, there was always this nervous energy in the air. I mean, she was beautiful and smart, and I was just, well, me. But there was something about the way she laughed at my dumb jokes and the way she talked about her dreams that made me feel like I could actually keep up. Eventually, we started having longer conversations. She'd sit on one of the chairs near my desk and talk about her classes, her plans after graduation, and what she wanted out of life. I started sharing my dreams too, and how I wanted something more than just the daily grind. We had this connection, and I couldn't deny that I was falling for her. One day, after a particularly long conversation, I found myself asking, "Would you want to grab dinner sometime? I know a great place nearby." She hesitated for a second and then smiled. "I'd like that." That dinner was the start of something beautiful. From there, we went on walks, shared stories, and learned about each other in ways I hadn't imagined. It was like we were two pieces that fit together perfectly. Even though we came from completely different worlds, she was a student chasing her dreams, and I was an office worker trying to figure out what was next. But somehow we made it work. I won't say it was easy. There were times when the pressure of our different schedules, our different lives, made things tough. But what kept us going was that we always made time for each other. Every day after work, we'd meet up, whether it was for coffee or just a quick chat. We never stopped finding ways to make the moments count. And now, looking back, I can't believe how that simple "hey" at the coffee machine turned into something so amazing. She's no longer just a university student walking past my desk. She's my partner, my best friend, the person I get to share my world with. Well, it all started one summer. The young man began, his voice carrying the warmth of the sun that had set behind him, his calloused hands resting on the top as he gazed out at the golden fields, where I never expected anything to change that season. Not with the usual work, planting, tending to the crops, making sure everything was in order. It was always the same. But then she arrived. He paused for a moment, as though the memory was a delicate thing he didn't want to disturb. Her family had rented a house near the edge of our land. She was different from the others that came to visit the countryside, something about the way she saw the world, like she noticed everything I had always overlooked. The birds, the way the light hit the hills in the morning. She looked at the farm like it was a piece of art. He smiled faintly, shaking his head as if the memory amused him. At first, I thought she was just another tourist, taking pictures of everything, asking me questions I didn't have time to answer. But then one day I saw her standing near the barn, watching the horses. She seemed so lost in thought, so out of place, yet so perfectly at peace in a way. I couldn't help but ask her if she needed help. "I don't know if I'm doing it right," she said, her hands running over the worn reins, trying to get a feel for the horses. The young man laughed softly, his eyes twinkling now as he recalled the moment. She didn't know much about the farm, but she was curious, so curious. She asked about everything, from the soil to the weather to how I planted the seeds. She even wanted to know how I knew when the right time to harvest was. He took a deep breath, eyes softening as he continued. For the truth is, I was never much of a talker, but with her, I found myself saying things I never had before, about the land, about my life here. I never realized how much I loved the place until I saw it through her eyes. She had this way of making the simplest things seem magical. His gaze drifted towards the horizon, and there was a pause before he spoke again, his tone more tender now. Over time, we spent more and more days together, walking through the fields, talking about dreams we hadn't yet shared with anyone else. It was a strange thing, knowing that the world she came from was so different from mine, yet she understood it like she'd always belonged here. A small contented sigh escaped him. I think I fell for her when I saw her helping me fix the fence one afternoon. The sun was setting and she was covered in dirt, her hair a mess. But there was this spark in her eyes, this joy in doing something so simple, that I realized she wasn't just visiting the countryside, she was living it, in a way no one ever had before. The young man leaned forward, his eyes meeting yours as he spoke softly, his voice a quiet confession. The truth is, I never thought anyone would understand the farm like she did. But she did. And the longer she stayed, the more I realized I couldn't let her go. One evening, under the stars, I asked her if she'd ever consider staying. Not just for a visit, but for real. She smiled like she'd been waiting for me to say it. "I think I already have," she said. He smiled, the memory filling him with a warmth that was more than just the setting sun. That summer, everything changed. It wasn't just the fields that had grown, it was me too. And I learned that love isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's just about the quiet moments in between. The ones that make you realize you're exactly where you belong.